Welcome everybody to today's webinar, Data Security Basics for Information Managers. We'll get started here in just a minute. We're waiting for a few more attendees. Okay, let's get started today with our webinar. And I'm Robert Smallwood, CEO of IG World Magazine and publisher. And today we're going to discuss data security basics for information managers with Bill Tolson. And if you're a CIGO out there, Certified Information Governance Officer, this is worth an hour of credit for continuing education. And Bill is a 30-year veteran of the industry and he's VP of Compliance at eDiscovery with an also emphasis on privacy and security at Archive 360. And he's a frequent speaker on legal and information governance industry events. He's got a podcast out lately that you should check out. We'll talk about. And Bill, welcome to the webinar, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. This is going to be, I think, a lot of fun. So, as Robert said, we're going to talk about data security from hopefully somewhat of an information management view. But the main question I think people usually ask when I bring this subject up around the information management professionals is, so why are we talking about data security? And really, data security and data privacy have become, the most important business drivers for information governance initiatives in many organizations. In fact, one survey that I saw not too long ago showed that yes, for information governance initiatives, companies are really focusing on data privacy and data security for all kinds of reasons, which we'll get into. But it's really a risk mitigation issue more than anything else. But so here's the agenda for today's presentation. I'll give you a quick walkthrough of it. First, we'll take a look at cyber terms. We're not going to go through and define them all, but I want you to at least recognize them. And as I go through the slides today, they will come up. And feel free to post questions, and we'll try to answer them as they come in. Then we'll take then we'll talk a bit about why information managers should become more familiar with cybersecurity. Actually, the main question here. Then we'll see why cyber has become an important focus for everyone, including companies, C-level, all the way from federal agencies all the way down to private industry. Then a new but closely related topic is we'll talk something a little bit about privacy laws. The privacy laws are starting to show up, not just in other countries, but also in the United States. And I'll talk a little bit about that, what that means, because and I'll say this many times during the presentation. Data security is closely tied to data privacy. In fact, when you talk to cyber people and CISOs, they always say the two terms in the same sentence because it is highly connected. We'll also discuss the differences between infrastructure security and data security. There's some things you really need to be aware of. Then we'll take a quick look at common data security technologies, just so you have a general idea. But again, feel free to ask questions, and Robert will pose them to me. Here's some a partial list of the better known cyber related terms you're going to be running across. And as we go through the content today, if one of the terms comes up, feel free to ask me to define a little bit more. But ransomware is one of those definitions, one of those terms you hear a lot. I'll talk about it, and then obviously phishing and others. But again, this is just a partial list. I mean, this this stuff is so large and intrusive now that and new variants are always popping up. So it's hard to relatively to keep track of. So why should information managers and others become familiar with cybersecurity technology, at least at the top level, and then also at the information manager level? Well, it's important that information and records managers see themselves not simply as information archivers, but also security advocates and professionals in charge of ensuring that information is readily available to those who need it. Security measures probably will complicate this. And the main thing here is that, and I'll talk a little bit more as we get into this, but I think information managers, records managers are going to start running across more complex issues around the data that they're managing. And it will, I think it's going to be very helpful for at least information managers have a grasp of what they're going to be hearing, and even more so, if you can become involved with the group that is deciding on these technologies and processes and implementing them, then you can have input, because as we get a little bit farther along in this, you're going to see technologies and processes that you're probably not going to thoroughly enjoy, that you're going to have to deal with. So, just be aware of that. But also, because you're involved with data and content all day, every day, you're going to need to make sure that content is preserved and protected throughout its life cycle, ensuring security protocols are not bypassed. And in a lot of cases, people figure this stuff out. So you need to make sure that if you're looking, or if you're working with people, or if you've seen individuals that are trying to bypass the system. I mean, nowadays, as I talk more about the privacy laws, nowadays that is a huge, very costly and legal risk. So just be aware of it. And information managers need to make sure that data is responsibly disposed of on time and in a secure manner. And nowadays, again, with the privacy laws and the requirements around PII, retention and disposition, there is, in many cases, there is no holding on to the data as long as you want, maybe creating a high watermark of, I'm going to keep everything for 7 years, and then start deleting it in mass, because a lot of these privacy laws really say you can only keep the specific data that you collected for a very specific period of time, and then it needs to be deleted. So that's something that a lot of people don't realize. Information management is going to come into more contact with data security measures, and what the security people are doing. They should look to become, again, like I said, closer to the security organization people, so that they have input on topics that could affect the information manager's jobs, or at least understand it, and help that, at least make sure the security people understand the consequences of their picks and things like that, because it obviously will complicate things. But it's.
And Bill, could I jump in here?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Robert.
One thing I like to tell my students in classes is a benefit, and it's speaking to the point you were just talking about, a benefit of getting some cybersecurity literacy is that now you can open up those communication lines and you can start to talk each other's language a little bit. And, part of information governance is collaboration and trying to get those silos broken down. So this is another advantage, to get some of these terms and tools and methods in your mind so that you can communicate better with your security people.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's what I was also trying to say is that the more you know, and again, you're not going to become security experts, but number one, getting familiar with and regularly talking to the security people, you're going to pick up kind of some of their knowledge. They're going to react that you're looking to partner more closely, so they're going to be more apt to contact you and talk to you about things, versus it's a us versus them type of thing. and especially around data security and data privacy, the consequences of it not being done correctly can put a company at risk under certain circumstances. For example, the EU's GDPR have standard fines that can equal 4% of a company's global gross revenue. And many of the US states fines, depending on what happened to the data, a breach or something like that, can be massive as well. For example, Colorado's standard fine for a breach of, for example, one data subject's record is $25,000. So if you're looking at a breach that affected 10,000 individuals, then you're looking at 10,000 times 25,000, and we're starting to talk big numbers now. So it is extremely important that data, that the way that companies look at data has to change. And I'll talk more about what that really means here in several slides, but it is going to be a corporate cultural change that absolutely needs to happen. Otherwise, companies are going to experience extreme issues. Okay, so what are the consequences? Pretty straightforward stuff. Corporate financial losses due to the fines, the penalties I just talked about, and then also litigation. Some of the privacy laws rely on the government to bring suit or something. For example, the state attorney general is the only one who's allowed to go after a company and issue fines and even take them to court. But other privacy laws in the states have something called the private right of action, which is a legal term that basically says, if I'm a data subject and my data was breached, the company didn't take care of it or something like that, then in those circumstances, in those states, I have a right to actually sue the company itself. In other states, you do not have that right. They rely on the attorney general to do it. So again, we start to get into an expanding complexity here of following all of these laws and the new ones that are going to be popping up every day. But the financial losses can be massive. And then you look at loss of productivity, mostly employee productivity. Data not accessible, inability to find data when needed, data deleted by ransomware, the need to recreate data if you can't find it. Those are all productivity costs that can add up very, very quickly. And then the hit to the company's reputation and brand damage. That could be massive. Just think about what happened with Target years ago when they had that massive breach of 143 million data subjects. I think so far the cost, and I remember reading this not too long ago, so I may be wrong, but I'm in the right arena. The ongoing cost to fix this for Target has reached like $200 million, and it's still growing based on lawsuits and all the services they're giving to the data subjects that were breached. So it can be massive. Just think what would happen to a small company where they, their small database of maybe 1,000 clients were breached. The cost and the legal expenses are just massive. And then you get into regulatory liability. This is where you get the fines, the penalties, and also the inability by from coming from a state attorney general saying you're not part, you can't offer this business anymore. Then all of a sudden what do you do? And then business continuity problems. But it is the consequences of cybercrime, if you're not ready for it, can put a company out of business very, very quickly. So a lot of facts, a lot of numbers here, but and these are interesting numbers. But one thing to keep in mind right now, the U.S. is the major target for cyber activity. I think it's some large amount, and it grows every year. The U.S. by far is the biggest attack vector by ransomware, extortionware, cybercrime, all those kinds of things. So just keep in mind that we have a target on our forehead. The ransomware attacks, which I'll explain a little bit later, but ransomware attacks grew by more than 40% during the pandemic. So this is pandemic related. And the average cost, and this is interesting, the average cost of a data breach in 2021 was $4.2 million worldwide. But if you just look at the US, the average cost was 8 to 9 million to basically recover from a data breach. And remember, I just talked about the target, a breach and $200 million. So, 9 million is an average across all of them. It happens a lot. Companies basically, on the average, are facing 22 security breaches in 2022 this year so far, and that grows every year as well. So just keep in mind that this stuff is just it's replicating so much, so high, and the costs are growing so quickly. By the way, one thing that most people don't even think about is most companies should have, many of them have now, but most of them should have cyber liability insurance. And there's all kinds of data out there. Obviously, if you get hit, if you have cyber liability insurance and you get hit by a cyber attack, ransomware, whatever, usually the cyber liability insurance that you're paying a huge amount of money for doesn't pay off the full amount. It pays a set amount. And then after a breach, the cost of your cyber liability insurance goes way up, much like your car if you get in an accident. But here we're talking millions upon millions of dollars.
And Bill, just to mention, I've got an example in real life of the Colonial Pipeline, the big breach that happened last year that shut down the gas lines. I was doing some consulting work with them 4 or 5 years ago in information governance, and pointed out all these issues they had in terms of security and governance. And they just sort of sat back and said, well, we've got cybersecurity insurance, and so we think we're covered. And you can't depend on cyber insurance to cover you in that case, because look what happened. Look what happened. The CEO ended up on Capitol Hill testifying, and it blew all of their privacy. They tried to stay under the radar and be private, and really damaged their brand quite a bit.
Well, and for Target, there was a noticeable, very large dip in just business after that. Usually the C-level of a company that's been breached, where it hits the front page of the Wall Street Journal, usually the C-level ends up being changed in several months.
Yeah, so, in the case of Target, the CEO got fired.
Yeah. It is a very scary thing, because you could suffer from a straight cyber attack where maybe you've got it's a privilege escalation attack or something like that, or a phishing attack where they just get access to your system and they start doing things, stealing information. By the way, law firms are one of the top 3 industries that are a focus of cyber, because cyber criminals want to get into a law firm and take their client data, because that client data has all kinds of very sensitive information in it, about M&A and legal matters going on. So cyber criminals will take it, and then they'll basically threaten the law firms that they're going to release it. In fact, an interesting story, not too long ago, 4 or 5 years ago, a major law firm partner, one of the original partners who started this law firm, was at a conference, and he was talking to one of the main directors of the FBI, and asked him about law firms being a major target and everything. And the FBI basically said, we noticed an incident with your law firm, and the partner knew nothing, but he didn't think they'd been breached or anything like that. And the partner asked me, he said, well, how much data did they get? And the FBI said, all of it. So,
Oh my
uh,
God.
yeah, you can imagine what those clients did, after they were told. Obviously, they probably jumped ship. I would, to tell you the truth, but everybody's at focus. Everybody, hospitals, healthcare, law firms, boy, and any company that collects PII, personally
And
identifiable information.
even these municipalities, cities and states have gotten hit.
Oh yeah, well there's the famous case of, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, Atlanta was hit with a ransomware attack. And I'll explain ransomware a little bit more here in a minute, but they were hit with a ransomware attack where all of their city systems were encrypted, and they got the ransomware notice on everybody's screen saying, we'll decrypt this so you can use, everything was encrypted, that none of the city services could be used. And basically the cyber criminals basically, I said, pay us, I think it was 100 or $200,000 in Bitcoin, and we'd give you the encryption keys. And Atlanta turned them down. And 2 or 3 years later, Atlanta had spent, I believe, 16 or 17 million dollars trying to recover. And one of the interesting facts is, I think a couple of years ago it was over 50%. Now I think it's 40-45% of ransomware, companies that get by ransomware pay the ransom, because it's just cheaper for them to do that. And the cyber liability insurance will pay off some, or most of it, depending. But the ransomware people, uh, and you'll hear stories where they paid and they never got the encryption keys. But the majority of the ransomware people will ensure that the encryption keys are given and everything gets back to normal, because that's their business. I mean, if ransomware, cyber criminals never gave the encryption keys back, nobody would pay the ransom anymore, because it'd be known that it's waste. It's a really interesting um, kind of industry going on. There's actually a ransomware as a service industry now, where these criminals basically work as a business entity amongst themselves. So it's getting bigger is the main point there.
Yeah, I don't know how they allow that to exist at all. But thankfully, you've got some tips and methods in here that you can help people avoid those kind of issues.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to. This is where I want to really make the point that data security and data privacy are really related. You can't really have privacy of your data without data security. I mean, that's just a given fact. I mean, you can create data security and all kinds of stuff without concentrating on privacy. But this is why the data security industry really now has merged with the data privacy people. And I know I keep saying that a lot, but it is one of the main things. They're basically closely tied together. When you talk to people in your organizations, the CISOs, chief information security officers, and then chief privacy officers, basically they're almost one and the same, because they have to be. And it's really now based off of all the new privacy laws that are coming around the world. I think 75 or 80% of all countries on the globe have data privacy laws. Some of them are much better than others, like the EU's GDPR, and now China and Brazil and Argentina, and it's all over the place. So it's really hard, number one, hard to keep track. But now in the United States does not have a federal data privacy bill. They have little pieces here and there, but there's actually one in the Congress right now that's looks like it might actually make it into law. But right now there are 5 state privacy laws in the United States: Connecticut, Colorado, Utah, Virginia, and the first one that came out that most people know about is California's CCPA. As an indicator of how popular the data privacy now is getting in state legislatures, in the first 3 months of this year, there were 27 privacy bills introduced in state legislatures. So my guess is that by This time next year, instead of 5, there'll probably be 20, 24, 25 privacy bills in the year after, probably darn near all 50 states will have one. The problem is they all slightly differ. Their definitions differ, their exemptions differ, their fines differ. They offer the same general rights to data subjects, and they put the same not the same, near the same requirements on companies who collect data, but they all slightly differ. So an organization and a company is going to have to eventually be tracking all 50 states privacy requirements, and then the rest of the world's too. So I mean, you're looking at complexity that's just unbelievable. In the United States, we're hoping with this privacy bill in the Congress that it will be one that basically preempts all the state bills, all the state laws. So if the federal bill becomes law, then part of the law basically says, we all the state laws are basically not in effect anymore. Only the federal law will rule. And most companies want that because it really simplifies what they need to do. And I've read the draft of the federal bill, and it does talk about preemption. It's just, is that going to be negotiated out or not? So we don't know. But it's really interesting to follow. But every one of those state privacy, or every one of those privacy bills have a data security section. So again, closely tied. And if you don't protect the sensitive data that the various laws have indicated you should, then you're in violation. You're looking at lawsuits. You're looking at massive fines. Really bad publicity, all kinds of things. But it's really going to be an interesting thing. By the way, part of the privacy bills, and I don't know if I have time at the end, I'll talk about this a little bit, but whole idea around data subject access requests, DSARs they call them, and again, this is going to be one of the issues that every company is going to face because they're facing it now. But hopefully I'll get into that, have some time later.
And Bill, just I've been doing a little research on ISO standards with the new 24143 information governance standard. And to just show you how interlocked privacy and security are, when they passed ISO 27701 in 2019, which is for privacy information management systems, they required that you first comply with 27001 and 2, which are the cybersecurity standards. So cybersecurity first, and then layer on privacy on top of that. And it's right there in the ISO.
Yeah, and again, this is going to become very quickly a major focus for every company because they're going to be doing risk mitigation against it, and also obviously most companies want to keep sensitive data private, but it's going to be a surprise for many companies as these things start becoming better known and their corporate legal or their external law firms start telling them, you have to do this, you have to buy these technologies, you have to put these processes in place. Otherwise, you're going to be seen as not even trying, and the fines are going to be bigger. So it is a huge now liability, and it's just growing every day. So,
hey, Bill, I got a question that came in here, and it's pretty long, but it's addressing what you were just talking about. And Suzanne asked, what is my liability as an information manager and the individual responsible for the program that addresses stale and sensitive data when it comes to cyber insurance? Meaning, do I need to have evidence / risk reports that show stale and sensitive data in my organization, how it's being addressed or not being addressed? What if my company's breached due to stale data sitting on a network that we identified for removal, but it never got removed because it is not a priority for the business? Would I lose my job?
No, I don't think that there is professional individual liability. The state and even global laws are basically focused on and written around the corporate entity itself. So if something happens and it can be traced back to an individual information manager making a mistake, and something happens. No, I have never seen that. The laws are not written that way. So, you know, you would not need to take out your own professional insurance for that. I do not believe. But you mentioned stale data. That's one of the, you know, inactive data basically, and that's one of the things that is a huge. That's one of the topics. It's actually one of the bigger risks. Is most companies, many companies, do not manage inactive data, and it's just sitting out there. And inactive data from maybe departed employees or just old stuff that's you know piled on itself for years and years and years can have huge amounts of personally identifiable information and other sensitive information in it. And it's the whole idea, and I'm sure you've all heard this before, but that's where we get into things like data minimization. And several of the laws actually talk about that. You know, you only keep data for a very fixed piece, specific time. For example, if you put a form up on your website, somebody wants to download a white paper and they got to give you, you know, their name and email address and maybe company and a couple other facts. Now with the laws, you have to, as a company, explain what exactly you're going to do with the information you just collected. And you can only keep that data for that specific use. And once that specific use is done, you have to get rid of the data. You have to delete it. And companies are not set up for that. Yeah, the whole idea of this is one of my pet peeves is companies just absolutely let stuff, you know, pile up. And it's the idea of, and I'll get into this later. This is one of my main, you know, kind of focuses is with these privacy laws now. It's not just compliant records that need to be captured, saved, protected. It's all data within an organization, including the data on workstations and laptops, because that stuff sitting remotely on edge devices. If there's PII in there, you know, and PII could be an email address or you know, what a name or a location, those kinds of things. If a individual, say if I, based on the Colorado privacy law, I'm based in Colorado, I have the right to query a company as to what data they've collected on me, what they're doing with it, and if I don't like what they're doing with it, I can basically demand them delete it, and they have to delete everything in most cases. And that means if my PII is sitting on your laptop and IT does not have the ability to view what's in my laptop, and you say, well, gee, we found all of the PII and we deleted it, and you really didn't because it's spread across, you know, 25 different laptops, you're in violation. And depending on where you are and what state law says, there might be a private right of action. This is the cultural change that I mentioned a little bit ago. Is we're reaching the point where all content, all data within an enterprise is going to have to be managed, and that includes edge devices, that includes, you know, cloud accounts, that includes everything, because company or individuals can query a company about their data, their personal data, and you have to be able to report everything about that data back to them within 15 days, for example. And a lot of companies will say, well, gee, we looked and we didn't find anything. You're not in our database or anything like that. And my PII is sitting on, you know, somebody's laptop because there was a work document that mentioned me or something like that. The company's in violation. So this is going to be a huge risk, and again, a cultural change, because that data, most corporations, most companies, and I've been in high tech for 40 years, but I've been in other industries too. Most companies basically have only looked at regulated data as something that the central IT system needs to manage, and that's usually 5 or 10% of all the data, you know, flowing in a company, and then that other 95% is left to the employees to do with what they want. And most employees look at that data sitting on their laptop as their data. I use it for reference. I use it to go back and pick up, a different, kinds of data out of it. And most employees are very protective of the data sitting on the laptop, and that's going to have to change because the company's going to have to know what's on everybody's workstation and laptop and index it and be able to search it when they get a data subject access request in. And again, it has to be done very quickly. I know I've gone off on this, but this is we could do a whole day on this. But some of the cyber terms, phishing is one you've probably heard about, and that's really, you get an email from somebody and it says, well, gee, I'm from HR in your company, and your W-2 needs to be changed. Click on this link, and you'll be able to change it. And it looks real and all kinds of neat things, but the link is basically a virus or a way in. So you click on the link, and all of a sudden you've given them access to the enterprise. That's been happening for a long time. People still, it's funny. I was doing a data security webinar a couple of months ago, and while I was doing it, I got 2 of these phishing attempts, and they were very, very professional looking. Some of them are obviously stupid, and you just look at the email address and it's not. But some of them are hard to tell. So phishing. And by the way, there are variations of phishing. There's smishing, which is basically SMS phishing on your cell phone. There's also vishing, which is a video version of it. But this is the biggest liability for every company and every individual in companies getting these emails, and you're busy, you're working on stuff, and you click on a link you shouldn't have, and all of a sudden these guys have access to the enterprise, and they could start doing changing privileges and giving themselves all kinds of rights within the system, and all of a sudden they're starting to take data and sensitive data. So it's the big one. Always be aware of that. And if your company offers training around data security in general, but they'll spend a lot of time on phishing. Then you look at malware, ransomware. I've talked about a lot already, but it's where maybe through a phishing email they gain access, and what the phishing malware will do is they'll start looking around in the system. They'll be very quiet, very underhanded. They'll start looking around the enterprise, looking for sensitive data, or they'll start looking for those parts, those servers, those other parts of the system that are absolutely relied on by the company, and they might sit there for a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, and then trigger. And what they do is they start encrypting all of the data within the enterprise. Sometimes all of it. A lot of times they'll just find the most sensitive, and they'll encrypt it. Which means the company can't access it anymore. And all of a sudden, they get a notice on everybody's computer saying you've been hacked, and pay us so much in Bitcoin, otherwise we'll destroy the encryption keys. That's been going on actually a long time. It's just getting more noticeable. The derivation of that is a new version of ransomware called extortionware, and basically it does the same encryption of your enterprise, but beforehand, the system, the software will actually go out and find your sensitive data and copy it to the cyber criminal servers. Then they'll encrypt everything, and then the ransom basically says you're not going to get the encryption keys, and oh, by the way, we're going to release all of your sensitive data onto the internet, and hit the brand, all kinds of neat things, and that's really bad. The third version of extortionware now, and this started happening about a year or 2 ago, is they'll take all the sensitive data, and part of the ransom is, we're going to release it on the internet, and then, boy, we're going to contact your privacy authorities and let them know that we've released this private data, which means the companies are at fault, no matter what, whether it was inadvertent or done through theft. If they didn't protect the PII, they're going to pay the huge fines and be sued. And I've seen this actually happen with the EU's GDPR. You get a notice and basically saying, we've encrypted everything. You can't do anything in your company, but we got this data. We're going to release it, and then we're going to call the GDPR authorities. And you're looking at possibly a 20 or a $40 million euro fine. So they're really getting more involved here. Have you run across that, Robert?
Well, I think people don't realize just how steep that fine is. Up to 4% of revenues is what they're saying.
Gross revenues, yeah.
Gross revenues, that's not profit. So if you're a $1 billion company, that's 40 million right there. If you're a $10 billion company, it could be $400 million fine. So
Yeah.
it's huge. And that might be all the profits for that year or several years.
Well, and that could put some companies out of business. So it is extremely serious. And that's why, you know, the whole data security, data privacy thing is really important. But, you know, and I've already kind of talked about this. Privacy laws are driving the need for security. I won't go back into that. And you can go through the slides later. But again, since California issued the CCPA and then the follow-on CPRA regulations, and now the other states, it's going to escalate very quickly. Companies, your C-level, and even your information management people need to be aware of this, because it's going to cause all kinds of issues. Another
Bill,
thing,
we had one quick question.
Yeah.
From the audience. Someone purchased some wine, and when FedEx delivered it, they said, we need your birth date and we need to scan your ID, your driver's license. and she was not happy about that, and she wants to know, can I ask them to delete that now? And really, from a privacy standpoint, once they verified that you're old enough to purchase that alcohol, they're really supposed to dispose of that, because that was the only purpose that was meant for.
Absolutely right.
But she could ask them specifically to delete it, right?
Absolutely. Well, let's put it this way. It depends on where they're located and if they have a state law that looks at that. That's a great example. I have not heard that before, but I'm not sure why they would scan it. Maybe for record keeping purposes, that, you know, 3 months down the line they can prove it. But as a matter of fact, no matter where the company is located, whether they have a state privacy law or not, or if this questioner is sitting in Colorado, Connecticut, Utah, Colorado, Virginia, you know, they do have the right now to say, get rid of it, unless there's a regulatory or legal need to keep it. In most cases, there are not. But if I were this person, I would ask them to delete it anyway, and see how they respond. But that's a great example. I'm going to do some research on that. That's good. Fantastic.
It's a good real life example.
No, absolutely. Okay, so basically infrastructure security versus data security. And again, something at least you need to know about this stuff. Infrastructure security is that security system around your enterprise that stops people, hopefully, from breaking in. Of course, you get a phishing email and all of a sudden they're in. But once they're in, the system is open to them. You know, it's called infrastructure security, is also called perimeter security. Once you break through the perimeter, then they could do whatever they want. So it's really somewhat weak. You need both. You need perimeter infrastructure security, but you also need specific data security. And this is where you are setting up security practices, and this is where information managers get involved on individual files. You know, and usually it's all files, but you can get very specific, you know, so that even if a cyber thief breaks through the perimeter, then they're looking at, you know, needing to get into the security placed around individual files, and that really slows them down. You know, basically, you know, cyber thief breaks into the network, sensitive data can still be protected with like encryption, zero trust design, and role-based access controls. I mean, you can set up, you know, using, you know, Azure AD or the version that AWS offers, so that you can set up security based on files and based on who's been given the rights to look at those things. You know, even to the point of encrypting specific sensitive fields within a file. We call that field level encryption. So, you know, you go into an email and the system can automatically find, you know, bank numbers, credit card numbers, you know, all kinds of neat things, and basically encrypt them or anonymize them. And that really is a tough, you know, roadblock for you know, cyber thieves to really spend the time on breaking through those. Usually they're looking for the easiest points. And if all of a sudden they start running into a bunch of files that have individual controls on them, and this is not new technology. I mean, we add to the capabilities every year, but this has been around, and this is something that companies can do. My biggest surprise is why companies don't use encryption. Encryption's been around forever. The simpler kinds of encryption take almost no additional CPU or cost to do. It's a great data security capability, and it just, most companies don't do it. They rely on the infrastructure security to protect themselves. And again, you get a simple phishing attack via an email, and all of a sudden the perimeter security is worthless. So that's one of my hot button issues is, encrypt your sensitive data. In fact, President Biden's executive order 14028, for those who care, again 14028, last year basically ordered all government agencies to install multi-factor authentication, encrypt all data, all sensitive data while in transit and while at rest, and then also adapt to zero trust architectures. I think companies in the private sector will be doing that soon. They're going to need to keep their security at least at the base level. Again, I won't revisit this. I know we're running somewhat out of time, so I'll bypass you. I've already talked about that. But again, information, security, information managers in cybersecurity. Well, again, why should they care about cybersecurity? Well, information managers are starting to, or already have been subject to running into data security technology and processes. Today's regulatory environment, all content is potentially regulated, again, because it can contain this personally identifiable information that governments around the world, as well as states in the US, are really starting to focus on now. And it's really important for the C-level at your company to really understand this. This is a huge liability for companies that many just don't know about. And again, I talked about at the bottom there, data minimization. That has to be an ongoing practice. Data minimization, defensible disposition. Get rid of all the stuff you don't need, and then start practicing data minimization, because that lowers the risk of data that can be stolen. And that's really, that's very simple to understand, but it's very effective. And again, some companies just don't realize it, and employees are allowed to save data forever, and that is becoming a huge risk.
And Bill, just
Yep.
from the standpoint of data minimization and defensible disposition, that also is going to that's also going to keep you from having any kind of over retention and potential liability or risk of this data being called into a court if it's sitting out there and it's already met its lifecycle requirements.
Yeah, that's a great point, Robert. I mean, nowadays most attorneys, corporate attorneys, want to get rid of data legally as soon as possible, because number one, there could be smoking guns in there that don't know about, and if you can legally delete it, why not? And then there's the whole issue of the cost of e-discovery. A good opposing counsel can make you spend a lot of money on discovery because you have a huge amount of data, and they want you to go through it. If you have 100 terabytes worth of data, and they have reason to have you search most of it, they're going to do it because it's going to drive you to settle. But if you have 2 terabytes or 5 terabytes of data to search through, and then you can cull that down, that's less of an offensive weapon by the opposing counsel. So data minimization is also very important for litigation and e-discovery, as well as risk mitigation. I mean, it really is. Okay, so common data security technologies and processes. Well, data mapping. Where's all of your data? Your company should be performing a data mapping exercise at least annually, probably quarterly. because data moves around. But where is the data and what kind of data is in these repositories and who's the owner of the data, all kinds of neat stuff. Then we talked about data minimization, air gap backups. And this is where I might have mentioned it when I was talking about extortionware, but the whole idea that these ransomware attacks, and I'll go out and look for your backups and delete them if they can. So you can't do a restore. You have to basically pay the ransom. And air gap basically is a physical function in most cases. You know, if that tape where your backup is removed from the tape drive, then that's the air gap. The ransomware cannot reach that physical tape to do anything to it if it's not connected to the system anymore. And we could do that programmatically as well. And I'll talk about that for a very short period of time here in a minute. But that air gap is basically the fallback that always works if you do it right to protect your systems from cyber attack and ransomware, so you can actually restore. And then you get into RBAC, which is role-based access controls. That's a programmatic, who has access to the system, who has access to this specific file, and it's all done, you know, at a programmatic authority level. And then zero trust. Zero trust is a term you're going to start hearing a lot of. It really, they refer to it as least privilege. So if you have a zero trust architecture and you get into your enterprise, fine, but then you have to keep reauthorizing yourself every time you want to get into a different system. And it means, so, you know, if cyber criminal breaks through your perimeter and then has access to everything, that's bad. But once they get in, if they have to go through the same, you know, exercises to get into each individual system and then each individual file, that is very highly trusted now. So they call it zero trust. No matter who you are, the CEO of a company, you're not trusted. You gotta keep presenting your credentials every time you do something. And that's the future of most systems quickly. And then we get into things like hiding data, data masking, encrypting data, field level encryption. I mentioned anonymization and pseudo-anonymization. Basically, anonymization means I'll find, you know, fields where PII are, and I'll encrypt it and then throw away the encryption key, so it can never be viewed. And again, you do that in files in specific fields. You know, you might pull up an email and, you know, the bank numbers have been encrypted, and because we threw away the encryption key, there's no way to ever actually decrypt that. Pseudo-anonymization is that same thing, but they keep the encryption keys so that later, if need be, they can decrypt those things and look at it. So various levels of hiding data, and then probably everybody knows what redaction is, but there's various ways. You know, you start getting into various forms of encryption, and again, I mentioned encryption is my hot button. But you can there are even now versions of encryption where you can encrypt a file and never need to decrypt it, but still the system can utilize it. And we get into some pretty complex things here, but that kind of technology now exists, especially in the cloud. And we offer that kind of security and encryption, field level encryption. Homomorphic encryption is the version. And then you get into things like secure multi-party computation, which is a form of encryption as well. And that's all part of now a great cloud archive, like we can do in an information management system.
Bill, I know, I don't know if this is still true, but it used to be that the downside of encryption was then you couldn't index those documents or that data. Has that changed with some new technologies?
It does, and I mentioned homomorphic encryption, and that is a version of encryption that you can actually, while it's encrypted and maybe sitting in the cloud, the home system can actually index it and manage it based on metadata or even content, but it's still encrypted. You can actually do searches on it, all kinds of neat things. It does, the downside is it does take more computing power, but now, you know, to be encrypting, re-encrypting, all that stuff on the fly, just for certain things. But now if you're in the cloud, Clouds are dynamic, so you can spool up a bunch of CPU to do a search on a huge database that's been encrypted by a homomorphic encryption, and then spool it down again, 3 minutes later, instead of purchasing all those servers to put on-prem that you may use, rarely. So that's a great question. So I know we're running out of time here, so let's go through a checklist, the top 10 data security practices checklist. So some of these are pretty obvious. Create system use and security policies. Pretty simple, but also document them. And then to go along with that, train the employees at least annually. We do it on a quarterly basis, but train employees annually on security and privacy best practices and document it. And I'm going to keep saying document it, because if you're being sued by an agency or even by an individual and you're in court, judges absolutely love the fact that you went to the point where you created these systems, you did these things, and you documented it. Because if you documented it, it happened. If you didn't document it, the judge is going to say, I'm sorry, it never happened, because you can't prove it. So that's really important. Decide what data should be secured. And this is where we get into that question of mine. Are you just going to secure what you think of as regulated records? Or are we getting to the point we're going to need to secure probably all of the data? And I mean, by secure, I mean protect via data security, because of the risk that it now poses. Because again, regulated information could be anywhere and everywhere, not just in regulated documents. And then decide what to do about locally stored employee data. Is that, a bridge too far, or is that the next thing? I believe it's the next thing. Probably it's going to happen, not quickly, but it's going to have to happen just because of the liability. So maybe in the next 5 years, you might see more organizations setting up systems that, capture, data from edge devices and bring it in centrally so it can be managed. And maybe there's a syncing process going on to do that. And then, like I mentioned already, produce a data map and update it regularly. Extremely important to know where your data is. And then the last 5, consolidate semi-active and inactive data. You consolidate it so you can secure it, you can search it, you can retain and dispose of it. A lot of companies will kind of wave off inactive or semi-inactive data as not important. Again, we're reaching the point nowadays where it doesn't matter if it's inactive or semi-active. There could be content in there that you need to be aware of and need to be able to react to based on a right to deletion request. Encrypt all PII. Pretty simple. I've been talking about that now for a little while. But encrypt the PII, and if possible, don't let a cloud provider do the encryption and keep the encryption keys. Find systems where you can create your own encryption keys and you control them, not a cloud provider. Not a best practice. If a cyber criminal gets into a cloud where there's encrypted data and the encryption keys are there, they'll find them and then they'll decrypt your sensitive information. Fully understand all regulatory data handling requirements. We're getting into very specific requirements now based on these privacy laws. So your security people and your privacy people, chief privacy officer, are going to really have to come up to speed on this. Actively perform data minimization to, number one, keep rot out of the system, lower your overall liability of data, the wrong data being stolen. If a lot of the data is gone because it's no longer needed. And by the way, there's a great DuPont case study on this having to do with e-discovery. I won't get into now, we have no time, but if you follow up, send me an email, I can contact you and we can talk about it. And then encrypt backups based on the extortionware. Encrypt your backups. And if you're not using tape, many companies now just put backups on spinning disk. Encrypt the backups to protect against extortionware, copying that sensitive data, and then write your backups to a cloud worm storage. Azure has it, AWS has it. If it's encrypted and if it's sitting on an immutable tier or a worm tier, then the extortionware has nothing they could do with it. So that's a great way to actually save that data. Let's see. Key takeaways. I won't go through these. I know, Robert, we're at the top of the hour, but you can read these. So I'll.
And these slides, they'll be able to see a recording of this as well. And these slides be available, Bill?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, very good. Well, that was an excellent session, Bill. I learned some stuff. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
And I think we should maybe do another one because we could do another hour easily.
Oh yeah, I could do 2 days on this straight.
Uh-huh.
I know most people would not look forward to that, but I could.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and it's interesting stuff to me, and it changes every day. So
Oh yeah. Well, as the new laws come out, and they're coming out all the time, you know, we need to keep track of them and figure out what is different about them and all that kind of stuff. Canada has one right now that's going to be coming out, so we need to keep track of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and stay tuned. We'll have some more of these informational webinars. And Bill, thank you very much for the good information.
Thank you, Robert, and I appreciate everybody who jumped on today. Thank you.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you.